Ward Fenley here with you again from New Creation Ministries International. All right, we're going to look at the word generation. And I'm going to read some sections taken from several articles that I've written. I've put them together in a book. I'm not going to tell you what the title of the book is because I don't want you to be necessarily turned off by the title of the book. But I'm going to read from this book, okay? If you do a search, you'll probably find the title on the internet anyway. So the first word we're going to look at, as far as time statements go, is generation. All right? Generation. The word generation was one of the first words that truly made me think that Christ said he was returning in the lifetime of the apostles. I was about 13 or 14 years old at the time. I went to my dispensationalist pastor to find the answer. After all, pastors have all the answers, don't they? He graduated with a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary, with honors in Hebrew and Greek. The answer I received from him regarding the definition of the word generation was, it means race. He said this with authority. Back then I was not familiar with using Strong's Concordance, so I just took his word for it. That was my problem. I took his word for it. I did not find out until years later, when confronted by an inconsistent preterist, that the word generation does not mean race. This inconsistent preterist told me it meant exactly what it said and that I should check it with Strong's. I did. He was right. There is a word in the Bible that does mean race. It is the Greek word genos or genos. And it means born, country, kind, nation, offspring. The word, however, for generation in Matthew 24:34 is genea. It means an age, a period. Generation. Nevertheless, the inconsistency of this preterist in separating the AD 70 destruction of Jerusalem from the glorification of the saints became very apparent. Needless to say, the great and sovereign God changed my stubborn heart. He even changed my will. Thy people shall be willing in the day of thy power. Psalm 110, verse 3. Well, back to generation. It is imperative to understand the Bible's explicit definition of the word generation. This can be found in the book of Hebrews chapter 3, verses 7 through 10. Therefore, as the Holy Ghost says, today, if you will hear his voice, harden not your hearts as in the day of provocation, in the day of temptation in the wilderness, when your fathers tempted me, proved me, and saw my works 40 years. Therefore I was grieved with that generation. Another passage that defines the word generation is found in Acts chapter 8, where the Ethiopian eunuch is approached by Philip while reading Isaiah 53. Acts 8, verse 33 says, in his humiliation, his judgment was taken away, and who shall declare his generation? For his life is taken from the earth. Jesus probably did not live more than 33 years. His generation and his life are terms that correlate with each other, signifying the timing of his life and ministry. Also in Acts is the sermon of Paul regarding Christ and his fulfillment of the Davidic covenant. Acts 13, verse 36. For David, after he had served his own generation by the will of God, fell asleep and was laid unto his fathers and saw corruption. So it says David served his own generation. Well, what happened after David served his own generation? He died. His serving his own generation was the period of time that he was the king of Israel. How long did David serve his generation? That is, how long was he king? We find an indisputable passage that defines the generation of which Paul spoke. 1 Kings chapter 2, verse 11. And the days that David reigned over Israel were 40 years. 7 years he reigned in Hebron, and 33 years he reigned in Jerusalem. In light of these clear definitions of generation, let us look at the other passages containing the same word. Matthew chapter 11, verses 16 through 19. But whereunto shall I liken this generation? It is like children sitting in the markets and calling to their fellows and saying, We have piped unto you, but you have not danced. We have mourned, and you have not lamented. For John came neither eating or drinking, and they say, He has a devil. The Son of Man came eating and drinking, and they say, Behold, a gluttonous and a winebibber, a friend of publicans and sinners, but wisdom is justified of her children. Jesus was referring to the Pharisees of his day. This is proven by verse 18, in which he mentions the name of John the Baptist, and verse 19, where he mentions himself. It was particularly their generation that came into contact with John and Jesus. And the Pharisees rejected them both. Thus the words, Whereunto shall I liken this generation? Matthew 12, verses 38 through 42 reads, Then certain of the scribes and Pharisees answered, Master, we would see a sign of you. But he answered and said, An evil and adulterous generation seeks after a sign, but no sign shall be given to it except the sign of the prophet Jonah. For as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the whale's belly, so shall the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh shall rise in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, because they repented at the preaching of Jonas. And behold, a greater than Jonas is here. The queen of the south shall rise up in judgment with this generation, and shall condemn it, for she came from the uttermost parts of the earth to hear the wisdom of Solomon. And a greater than Solomon is here. Clearly, the Pharisees wanted proof that Jesus was truly the Messiah and the fulfillment of the Abrahamic covenant. Therefore, they wanted to observe the lame walk, the blind see, and the deaf hear. It is because of this that Jesus said, A wicked and adulterous generation seeks after a sign. Jesus was addressing them. Even beyond that, he told them that the Gentiles would rise in judgment with their generation. Yet another passage that identifies the specific generation to which Jesus was referring is found in Matthew 17, verse 14 through 17. And they had come to the multitude. When they had come, there came to him a certain man kneeling down to him and saying, Lord, have mercy on my son, for he's a lunatic and sore vexed, for oft times he falls into the fire and into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, and they could not cure him. Then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? The generation that had the privilege of seeing the miracles of Christ was continually being reproved for its lack of faith. They actually were able to see the miracles and still doubted the power of God. Christ accordingly designated them as a faithless and perverted generation. The question of Christ in regard to their faithlessness is certainly proof of the identity of their generation. How long shall I be with you? It is unmistakably clear in this passage that Christ exactly defined his audience. And we'll continue more with this word generation in our next step.